Welcome back to logisticsales.com. And this is episode 37 of Mastering Sales series. I'm your host, Damon Graywall, and today we have our co-host and beautiful Gail Neuenhausen.
Hello.
And this is the third episode in our Creating Compelling Emails segment. Now, last time we focused on using research and feedback to make your emails smarter. Today, we're actually diving into key elements that directly drive sales results. In this section, we're going to be talking about calls to action, CTAs. A strong email without a clear CTA is like a conversation without no next step. So your prospect won't know what to do next. So we're here to help you to figure that part out. And in this episode, we're going to actually cover a few different items for CTAs, with the first one being what makes an effective CTA. After that, we're going to actually talk about the difference between tweaking CTAs to determine which one's a weak CTA versus which one is a strong CTA, and how to position your CTA within that email. So when we're positioning that into the email, we also are going to look at examples of action-oriented language, knowing that tonality of what that CTA needs to sound like and what its purpose is. So we're also going to give you a few tips and testing for optimizing that CTA to drive those results right into your sales process. So Gails, should we get started with the basics of what a CTA is?
Yeah, you betcha. Now we got to start off with understanding what a CTA is. And a CTA stands for Call to Action. Now, a CTA is the part of your email that actually is going to summarize and tell the prospect what you want from them. What do you want them to do next? What is the action step you're asking of them? Now, without it, even the most persuasive emails, they're not going to get replies because you haven't given your prospect any direction to head in. Now, key elements of an effective CTA they're going to incorporate being very, very clear about what you're asking. The prospect should be able to read your CTA and immediately they know and understand exactly what the next step you're asking them is. You also want to make sure that you're using action-oriented language. So using verbs like scheduling, reviewing, download, reply, things like that. So like, I'll wait for your reply. Can you please download this and let me know what your thoughts are? I've scheduled a call for next week, things like that. So it's using action-oriented language to direct the customer into your expectations for the call to action. You also want to make sure that they're low friction. So you have to make it easy for the prospect to understand and to act. If it's something that's going to take a lot of effort or time from the prospect, they probably won't do it. So you want to make sure it's the least friction that you can provide them and make it the easiest yes they can say yes to. And that comes down to alignment with your email's value. So your call to action should naturally follow the flow from the message. So you have your value statement and then follow it up by your call to action. So it's like that perfect transition. Here's the value. Now here's what we want.
Another way to kind of look at that is like saying, what's my goal? What's the goal of this entire email? What am I looking as an outcome from writing this email? And the CTA is the main component that's going to get you that outcome, or it's actually like one of the key components of that outcome. Because in order to get that outcome, we have to state the value statement, and everything has to be in sequence there where it makes sense along that whole message line to be able to make the ask, right? And that's what the CTA is that direction step to fix that sales process. Remember, this is like a key component of getting someone to act. And this can make the difference of how long your sales sequence is or how short your sales sequence can get to if you have the right CTA.
Exactly. Now, Damon, can you explain to us why, though, when we have a weak CTA, why does it consistently fail to get the results that we're looking for?
Well, thanks, Gail. Like a weak CTA, it's too vague or it's confusing or passive, and it just doesn't make sense for the customer. So it gets ignored in the whole process, and you kind of lose the whole flow of the whole sales process that you're trying to go through with that client. And so the CTA is like the main component, which is again, getting that person to act. And that's the whole thing that we're trying to do with any email, any conversation, is we're trying to get the customer to act to that next step. But if the message doesn't make sense, then what are they going to do? right? So we talked about this as well with having too long of an email. They're going to get confused in that process. They might not even get to a CTA if it's not clear enough. So that clarity becomes important. And there's a couple of examples here that we can give about some of these weak CTAs. And a weak CTA just means that maybe that you're not confident enough to make the ask. And so a weak CTA sounds like, let me know what you think. Depends on if that's the context of what you're going after, then it works. But if you're actually looking for that specific step, then it may not work. Another one may be something like, maybe we can chat sometime. And so it's too vague. It's not really going to get someone to create an action item right away, because you're saying sometime. What does that really mean? So there's no real urgency for that person to respond to you right away.
Yeah, and just even the word using maybe is almost like a self-doubt language. Like you as the salesperson should be like, can we chat sometimes? Or not even sometime, that's also another language, but can we chat on Monday? Can we chat next week?
Definitely.
That's assertive. The maybe can we chat sometime? It's very gray area. It's unsure. It's not clear. It's not concise. And it's definitely not direct.
Yeah. And even like that statement, if interested, then reply. Right. So again, you want to be more confident and just say, reply to get your whatever action item. Right. So again, it's being very clear with that. And instead of being very on the fence about it, right? So again, that confidence is going to come through. So like strong CTAs, they're more specific, they're actionable, and they're easy to respond to. And so whenever I write an email, I just want something to be so simple and easy that it's like a no-brainer, where it's easy and quick for someone to respond to. They don't have to write a huge email back to me. But again, is this something where they could come back with a yes, no, answer it in one sentence? And for me, that's a strong CTA. So it could be something like, reply to this email with your availability for a 15-minute call, or click here to schedule a demo this week. Something where they could just do it really quick, right? Click of a button, easy for them to do, quick CTA response. Or something like, if you can review the attached proposal and let me know if Thursday would work as a great follow-up for discussing the proposal that I've sent over to you. And so if I'm taking time to create something and give them something, what I'm looking for is that return back. And I want to put a time and place on it where we could actually follow up with that next step. And because I'm giving them something, it allows for me to be able to ask for something. So the key takeaway here is a weak CTA is going to leave your prospect of being a little bit unsure, where a strong CTA is going to create that certainty and follow up with that momentum to get to that next step. So Gail, can we talk about where to place that CTA within that email?
Yeah, and I think you just actually said it perfectly a second ago. You have to give before you can get. So when you're positioning where to place your CTA within the text of your email, you have to position it after your value proposition, because you have to provide them the benefit. You have to show them what we can do for them before you say, now what can you do for us? Okay, so once you've outlined the value proposition, you want to then just keep it nice and clear, concise, and visible, and that's key. So again, we talked about not having super long emails because you don't want to lose your call to action at the base of it, but you want to make sure that it's not buried between a bunch of text, it's not too vague, or like that it's not just obvious. Like they should look at it and go, okay, that's what they're asking from me.
And the value proposition is more showing them who you really are. Like what's going to make you attractive, make your company, your product, your service attractive to that client, and show them about what that outcome really looks like, what that benefit of that feature or product is going to be. That is really going to attract them to say, yeah, I want to call this person, or hey, this person really did their research and I'm not going to waste my time by doing this follow-up. And so the value is so clear that CTA is just a no-brainer. Yes, I want to be able to move to the next step. Let's go for it.
Exactly. And then a secondary tool that we can use when addressing call to actions in our emails is the optional secondary call to action. Now, there might be situations where the direct call to action might not be super clear, or you're kind of like, okay, are they going to go this way or are they going to go this way? So sometimes that's a good opportunity to actually dual wield the call to action. So you're actually giving them different choices, and choices are great because us as humans, we like to be able to feel like we have choices, to be able to choose ourselves and not be told what we want. So that does give us a little bit of flexibility. Now, a good example of that is, let's say if I was talking to somebody to move a bunch of shipments for them, and I might do my call to action, let me know what shipments you have heading out next week so we can coordinate the trucks for you. And my secondary call to action might be, or if you have any questions, please let me know when would be a good time to set up a call so we can go over them. So it's primary, this is really what I want from you. That's my call to action. But then addressing a secondary call to action. So if there are any areas, if there's maybe something that's still preventing them from pulling the trigger and closing the deal, it gives them a choice that still directs me towards a sale. Now, a different example for that is we want to talk about email structure. So you want to start with your subject line. The subject line, it has to grab attention. Then we get into that opening line of your email. Start it with that personal hook. How do you get their attention and keep them reading through the body of your email? Now, this brings into the value proposition. So how are we going to help them? Outline A, B, and C. This is what we'll do for you. And then wrap it all together with a clear next step or a call to action. Then you're going to wrap the entire email up with a quick, polite closing, professional end, thank you for your time, something like that. And then send off your email. But that consistent setup of having it properly structured, properly formatted, properly researched, and personalized, it's going to give you better benefits and better results for your email campaigns.
And we kind of went into these in detail the last 2 episodes. So if you haven't checked out the last 2 episodes, take a quick look and you'll get the context of why these are so important and how it helps with that CTA, because the well-aligned email is a full structure. It's not just one component of it. But when we realize that all these pieces are adding to that one story to really make it happen, look for those tips, right? And again, look for that reasoning behind why we're telling you about the stuff that we're mentioning here in these 5 steps to really make it clear and create that purposeness of making sure that everything that we're sending to a client is consistent and that it follows a structure which is easy for that client to understand and where that information is actually coming from. So we actually go into those details ahead of time. But let's get into the next section, which is like talking about action-oriented language and tone. And so when we are feeling...
I would just say, sorry, Damon, here, I just thought I'd jump in, but I think this is really important because I think people underestimate how much language and tone actually impact your sales. The way that you say something, it could be the exact same sentence, but the way you write it or the way you say it on the phone will impact the way that the customer is going to feel with the statement. So we have to work on the way we tone things, the way that we relay things to make sure that the intended emotion is being evoked by the prospect and not the unintended emotion.
Yeah, I always say words matter. The words that we choose and the words that we use are 100% going to make a difference in the type of responses that we get because it evokes in a feeling from when you're reading it. And this is where I would definitely see if that same message that you're writing out actually relates to the feeling that you're trying to evoke out of that person and the response that you're trying to evoke out of that client or customer, and see if it actually resonates with everybody. Test it with a few of your friends. Check to see if the language and see what their feedback is of how it makes them feel. And so when choosing these words, we want to be careful about the type of, even verbiage that we're using. Are we saying the words schedule, review, join, download, reply? And how is that in context with what we're saying with our messaging? And is our messaging consistent from subject line to value statement to CTA to make sure that these actually align with what we're saying, or is it flowing, right, in that context? And again, for me, is having a more conversational conversation with somebody versus more of a marketing email, which is more information based. But I want it to sound like a conversation to let the person know that it's real and that I'm looking for that response back. And it's not just a templated email, that I'm actually trying to be very precise here because I want to target you specifically. And so I want to keep my sentence structure very concise and making sure that, again, I'm following all the information that we had mentioned to you before about that information, interpreting into what I'm saying. And I want to make it easy for that prospect to be able to say yes. So give them all that information, show them that we're the market expert. And then again, my tonality is always going to be more confident versus being more pushy. And so emails are perfect to be able to show people the knowledge that you have, to show people the value that you can bring them without having to be pushy. Because there's a lot of things in email that I can say about the company that I don't necessarily want to say over the phone or in person. And so email becomes that perfect place where I can actually position myself for that success story down the road. And it's, you don't have to really brag about yourself. It's in person is a little bit harder to do, but on email, it's a little bit easier to do depending on the words that you choose. So there's a lot of tricks of the trade, but definitely you want to see how that context is playing into shape so that you can actually create the right CTA. And a couple of examples that I like to use, it's always more in a question format. And a question format for me is a little bit less pushy, but allows that customer to feel like they're in control. And I want that person to have that feeling that, yeah, you get to make the choice. And it's not being dictated by me because, again, who am I in that position to say, hey, you know what, I have to have this done with you. Depending on, again, where you are in that sales process, sometimes you have to be a little bit more direct. But usually in the first couple of follow-ups, it's more of an open-ended question. But again, easy for them to respond. And examples of that are, are you still looking to move forward and complete the setup process? Or do you have any shipments available for me next week? And again, using some of those secondary follow-up CTAs of saying, okay, well, if you are, I'd love to get the paperwork process set up with you, ready to move on to next steps whenever you're ready. Something very quick, right? Again, I'm trying to do something very quick and fast. And so if you're doing more of a general email, something like even, please click below for a 15-minute information session might be more suitable for what you're doing, or download your free resource, click here. Again, making it very quick and actionable item that they don't really have to think about it too much, but I'm really doing the thinking for them and making their process for them to press that button a lot easier. So you can test different CTAs to see which one gets you the highest response rate. Jill, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, this actually leads me right into the last point that I wanted to talk about, which is actually testing and optimizing your call to actions. Damon just mentioned it, click-through and response rates. Now, they're really important when we are doing emailing campaigns because especially campaigns, it's a little bit different if you're doing customized, personalized emails per company, per person, because those are going to be rewritten for everybody individually. But when you're doing campaign work, this is where you might be sending 100 people the same email with slight customizations for them. You want to go through and analyze the click-through rates, the response rates. See, did 100% of the people open this, but nobody clicked the link? Okay, why? And start analyzing and answering those questions and figuring that out, because that's going to give you the ability to process and improve them, okay? Because when we go through it that way, we get the option to experiment with different wording, different placements for photos, imagery, bold text, italics, anything like that. So different formatting options, even comparing different versions of the email as a whole. So maybe we have a long form version that's got a couple of paragraphs explaining the context of your email. And then we've got a short version that's maybe only one paragraph. So it's playing around with it and seeing what is being attracted better by the viewer.
I think another way to kind of word it is like, is the message hitting with the client?
Yeah.
If the message hits, then the CTA is easy. But if the messaging is not there, then we want to relook at the entire email structure and say, okay, what happened? Because if our CTA was, again, on point, but the messaging wasn't there, then the CTAs may or may not work.
Yeah, like a good example for that are in the logistics industry, clients, they might be better responding to a metric-driven call to action, something like see how we can reduce delays by 20% versus a generic subject line that would be something like truckload transportation across North America. Like that doesn't really tell them specifically what is in it for them. What is this email about? Whereas if you say, hey, we can reduce delays by 20%, that's an immediate value add right there in the subject line. So those small tweaks, they can really adjust and change the impact of your call to action.
For sure. And then the CTA that you're using there, whether we can reduce delays by 20%, going back to the value proposition, if we've highlighted how we're going to make that happen and the customer can actually relate to it, is going to allow them to believe that CTA is true. And that's what's going to create them to be able to click on it or message us back and say, yeah, I'm interested because this stuff that you're writing here is exactly what I'm looking for. And that's what you want to create from a good, going back to that rest of that body of that email structure and saying, hey, if we put the right points in here, then that CTA is just going to work. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where the research is important, because if you've done your research properly, it's much easier to write call to actions that will be effective because you have an understanding of what your prospect is looking for out of a service provider.
And that takes us right into our worksheet. So hopefully you've been following along and taking some of the tips that myself and Gail have been giving you. And please utilize it into the worksheet to create your perfect CTA in your perfect email. And that wraps up this episode 37, which is incorporating CTAs into your emails. And today we covered quite a few things. And I'm hoping you got some good value out of what we were saying. And some of the topics that we covered today were what makes an effective CTA, weak versus strong CTAs, positioning that CTA into that email, and knowing that the language or tonality that we're using is going to play a big impact into the conversion rates for your emails. And then lastly, we also spoke about the testing component and how important that testing is to make sure that you can do that continual improvement process to get better results for the emails that you're writing. So remember, a great email is only half the battle, and a clear, compelling CTA is what gets your prospect to act. And in the next episode, we'll dive more into making it more personalized, and we're going to go over which subject lines and opening lines are going to make those emails impossible to ignore. So until then, craft emails with clear next steps, test your CTAs, and watch your response rates climb. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing your emails and comments, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.